Welcome to ZHA Maya Training GUI Tour.
I'm going to be showing you around the interface and how to modify it and how to get the best out of the tools available within Maya for modeling and general navigation. So let's do a little tour. Along the top we have our menu. This will change, this list of menus will change depending on which discipline you've selected here. So you've got modeling, rigging, animation, effects, rendering and customize. But rather than using all this stuff up here, what we're going to be using is we're going to use over here, we've got workspaces. So you've got standard for modeling, so it reselects all the stuff you need for modeling. You've got expert, which we're going to go into in a minute, which is very minimalist. So you can see all the menus that disappeared. Don't worry, Maya has a way around that. And then you've got sculpting, UVing, and a sort of other interfaces. So let's go back to classic, which you're most used to. So below the menu here, we have a next level up, or next level down I should say, and they're broken into sections. The first section here is opening and saving, so that's new document, open, save, undo, redo. Next to that is objects, so all objects will be selectable. Then here we have the type of object you're going to be selecting, so you've got the group, then you've got the object level, and then you have the component. So this would say if you had a group of objects, you select them, one of the group, it will select the whole group. With this one, if you select an object in a group, it will just select the single object, and the component level allows you to have access to the vertices, edges, faces, and alike. To the right of that, you have a submenu which tells you what you can see, what can be selected, what can't be selected. So at object level, it tells you could say, I don't want to say select any curves, so you won't accidentally pick up any curves, or this one would disable polygons, and so on and so forth. So have a little play with those if you need to filter it. And then at polygon level, it changes again to what would be for components. So you've got things like vertices, faces, and such. So we'll stay in object mode, which is most common. Sorry, excuse me, a bit hoarse today. And then to the right of that, we have the snapping options. So we have grid snapping, curve snapping, vertex snapping. I think that's pivot snap, and assortment of other. That might be surface. And then the final one is live surface. We'll get into that later. And then further along, skipping these ones along here, then we have up tree, or sort of input. Select the input of the object you've got selected, or the output of the object you have selected. I think this one here is for turning undos on and off. And then to the right of that you have rendering options. So this one brings up the shading. This one is the render settings or render globals, IPR, interactive rendering, render window, and such. And then to the right, and then you've got pause of rendering, of course. And then on the right of that you have an extra thing here, which is like you could do transforms, so you can move something by specifying a number. You've got relative transforms, which is what it says. Rename is very useful for renaming multiple objects at the same time, and select by name is another useful thing to have. So we'll leave that on absolute transform. Rename is my most common. And then to the right of that, you've got more options here for disabling and turning on these menus. So coming down one more level again, so this is what's known as the Maya shelf. The shelf is broken into tabs. Clicking on the tab changes what buttons are available. Everything in Maya is completely customizable, but most people just customize the shelf. So if you find yourself wanting to find a tool quickly, or to repeat an operation, or even to store some mail, which is the scripting language which Maya is written in, you'd put it in here, and we'll go into that later with the course, but I just want to show you around, so let's keep it on the default. Further down, there we have what's known as a pane. Maya Maya's panes can be anything really. It can be a perspective viewport, or it can be, so if I go to here in panels, and we've got panel, so you can choose what one it would be. So we could say we could turn this whole pane into an outliner, which is what I just did there, or we can change it back, so the panel, we'll go back to perspective. There we go. Sorry, excuse me. And each panel has different sort of viewing settings. So in a viewport panel, you've got grid on and off. There's options you use. You've got sort of, I think that's film gate, resolution gate, and it specifies what resolution your scene is at. Then you've got some other gates to help you organize the thing, and then you've got, I think that's action safe and then title safe if you're doing titles on a film or something, or a project. Then you've got wireframe mode, shaded mode, textured mode, wireframe on object. In fact, let's make an object. So let's make a sphere. Press F to focus. And so click off, so you can see what these buttons are doing now. So when you turn this one on off, you can see it displays the mesh vertices, and, well, not vertices, the edges. This one would be textured if there was any textures assigned to the object, and this one's wireframe and shaded. You've also got lit. If you have a light in the scene, that would light that up. We'll create a light quickly just to show you what it means. So we're directional. So you can see that now that light is having an effect on our object. So we'll delete that. We don't need that. Go back to shaded, wireframe shaded, and then other ones along here a bit more fancy. So this one I believe is occlusion. This one's motion blur. This one's line smoothing. Line smoothing is quite nice because it smooths out the jaggies of the interface. Then you've got other ones here. So that's ghosting. This one here, if this object selected, this one isolates the object, so everything else in the scene would be hidden. Just to show you see what that would look like. Let's make a cube, move it out, select the object, and then we'll isolate it using the isolate button. Bang. You can isolate the object, or if we select the face, don't worry, I'll be showing you how to do all this stuff. And we do isolate now. Where is it? There it is. Now just the polygons will be isolated. Very useful if you're dealing with a very complex scene with dense meshes. You just want to work on a section, you can do it that way. Okay, so we'll make a new document. Don't save. Okay, so it's all fresh and new. Over to the left of the panel, then to the going further over, then we've got exposure. So that's which is quite useful in the viewport, because sometimes you want to grade an image or see what you're looking at. This one's gamma. These are generally for lighting and rendering stuff for modeling, and as such you won't need to worry about any of that. So 0 is obviously black, 1's neutral. Then you've got what's known as a lookup table. We'll get into lookup tables later in the course, but generally speaking, you got most people used to sRGB. The film standard that I'm come from would be this one, which gives a much more contrasty look to the image. Leave it on sRGB for now. It'll be perfectly safe for doing our modeling. To the left of the panel over here is what's known as the toolbox. So the top half of the toolbox is you've got the selector, which is Q on the keyboard, and then W is move, E on the keyboard is rotate, R is scale, and T is the attribute control for the particular object. So give you an idea what that means. So if I was to say make a cylinder, this is what happens when I press T. So T is what brings this up. And so this is like the recipe for the object. So just using the mouse to move in there. And so if I was to say put in a value of, say, I don't know, 32, that would change the number of subdivisions around that axis. You can also say change the height as well, say make it twice as tall, and say half the width, until you get the desired shape you want. Below that we have interfaces, so this is obviously perspective. Then we can split the scene into 4 views, which is this method. Then we can do side by side, which is this one. And then we have just this one just brings up the outliner, which is quite useful. The outliner, actually, while we're talking about the outliner, it's here. The outliner is a list of everything in the scene. So at the moment we've only created the cylinder, so it's the only thing available on the list. Now, the outliner has ways of filtering and showing you different things. So, for example, if I click on display, you've got a menu list here. So you've got DAG objects. So DAG objects it filters it to objects which generally have transforms that you want to see most of. So you generally just want to see, if you make a new object, you only really want to see that one object. So if I turn off DAG objects, now you see all of the nodes inside Maya, every single one, including the time node that makes the playback work. Or, for example, the light linker, which means that lights actually work in the scene. Or the default shader, which is assigned to anything you make, and so on and so forth. So these are really the minimum number of nodes for Maya to work with to be able to function as Maya. We don't generally need to see them, but it's useful sometimes. It's like looking under the hood or behind the curtain for you to see sort of hidden nodes that may or may not appear as a DAG object. So we turn that on, so it reduces that. Now, at the moment we're only displaying the transform of the object here. So this is cylinder 1, okay? Which is the one we made. If I click on over on the right hand side here, we've got some other tabs. So the first one is channel and layers. So the channel box is what the most accessible part of the object's attributes. So here we have the translates. So we've got you've got X translate, Y translate, and the Z translate. Now to do that magic trick I'm doing there is I click on the value I wish to change, and then in the view in the panel I middle click, and then I get what's known as a virtual slider. Maya's got lots of little tricks like this, so you can get really close to something and just manually slide it up and down. Okay, so we click on the title at 0. If you want to scale, if you want to do more than one at the same time, you can just drag over and say enter a new value in the keypad. So there's 2, so I've just scaled it by 2. But this is the transform element of the object. So below the transform, which is known as P cylinder 1, we have P cylinder shape 1. P cylinder shape 1 is the actual object itself. So this is where the mesh is actually stored, and the recipe below that. So the input for P shape 1 is here, it's listed, and we've got polygon cylinder 1. So if I click on polygon cylinder 1, it's the recipe for making a cylinder. So this is all written in MEL, which all of Maya is written in. So by altering the values in here, it will update in the viewport, as you can see there. So this is just a tearaway of what is available in this here. You can see that they look very, very similar. Okay, so how do you see that in the outliner? So we go back to our outliner, let's bring it over. So why can't I see this here? Well, if you go up to display, and we ask it to show shapes, and I would recommend that you have shapes on, because this is the hierarchy of the scene, and as I flick down, there's the shape. But we still can't see the polycylinder node that makes the cylinder. So where would I see that? So if we go to turn off DAG objects, in here somewhere will be polycylinder 1, he says. There it is. Okay, so that's that node there, and there it is in the list. If we go Windows, where are we? Node editor. Click on that. So if I was to say, so this is like a flow graph, like you'd find in, say, Grasshopper. And so it works in a similar manner. You connect one node to the next. So if I select our cylinder in the viewport, and then using this button here, which basically says, show me the inputs and outputs of that object up and down the tree. So let's click that. And so that gives you the complete tree of this one object in Maya. Okay? So the cylinder is the recipe for the cylinder. The output of that, and I imagine it to be output, there it is, goes into cylinder shape, which I'd imagine would be in mesh, which is actually what draws the mesh itself. So cylinder shape is just a node for, it's like a mesh node. So if I plugged in, say, a polygon, like a cube creation node, then this will become a cube. So this is kind of like a framework for going from a creation to geometry. And then obviously here, this is the actual transform. You see this is above. So this is how Maya positions the object. So this will modify the placement of this. Now you can modify the placement of the vertices without a transform, but obviously it's much easier just to move it in X, Y, Z than to move the vertices one at a time or as a group, vividly. And then the final node here is the initial shading group. Remember I said that Maya has minimum number of nodes in the scene? Maya gives you the default shader for everything in Maya is Lambert 1. And so that is the initial shading group. And so whenever you make anything in Maya, this shader will be assigned by default until you tell Maya to assign a different shader. But let's not get stuck on that. Shading will also be included in this course later on. This is absolute basics of Maya, and I want to show you around very gently, and hopefully you can all follow, and I'm not going too fast. Okay, so how do we say full screen this? Well, the simplest way to say change between these two different views and make them full screen would be to roll over the particular view you wish. So let's say this one here, and tap the spacebar. Yeah, see? And tap it again, takes you back. Roll over this one, tap it, it maximizes that one. Tap it, comes back. Okay, so you just saw the hotbox. Spacebar and hold. The hotbox, in my opinion, is probably one of the nicest features of Maya. The hotbox means that you can do everything that you have in all these buttons and all this interface can all be done with this menu here and all the other contextual menus. So let's get into that. So in order to really understand what I mean, let's lose all of the rest of the interface. So let's tap into this view here, press F to focus our cylinder we've made, and I'm going to go from classic, and I'm going to go to modeling expert, which is probably the easiest way to disable most of the viewport. Well, so all the menus are gone. So how do we get to them? Well, if I hold down spacebar again, they're all here listed. So you've got the file open, you've got modify, all the ones we were just looking at are all available in here without having to have them all over the place. And the beauty of this is wherever my cursor is and I hit spacebar, the hotbox will appear underneath. Over here. So it means as you get used to using the hotbox, which has actually been inherited from the parents of Maya, which is Power Animator, which was the original Alias Wavefront software. They have a patent on this as well. You won't see this sort of interface anywhere else, but it's incredibly powerful. So the first button inside the hotbox I want to introduce you to is the Maya button. If you click and hold, okay, so this is a very, very, very quick way to navigate around. So if I want to look through the front view, I hit spacebar, click, drag down, and release. And now we're in front view. Spacebar, click, and drag up, and we're back to perspective. So if you want to do it quickly, you just do it like that. So the idea being is Maya will change the view or do things faster than necessarily the interface will actually keep up. Another good menu to know. So let's turn off. Let's go back to Q. Do you see there? If I press T, that disappears. But to make it disappear, press Q on the keyboard. Will make it go away. Excuse me. Sorry. And so let's look into the other menu. So that was the hotbox. So hotbox, we've got the main menus, and if you look, there's some V's. Before we go on to the next thing, we should actually finish the hotbox. So if I click above the hotbox, we can change to a perspective view, or we could do perspective from graph. So if we're doing animation, that would be very useful to get to. If I want to go back, up here, just drag up, and we get single perspective. Again, up here, so you've got all these different groupings. So they're generally set up as like perspective and relationship editor. The hypershade is obviously good for shading objects. Hypershade, outline, and perspective would be good for shading objects too. But if you're modeling, just the perspective is generally where you want to be. So let's keep it on there. To the left, you have even more. So you've got these are the masks we were talking about that were available at the top of the menu. So you can mask things like nerd masks, hierarchical, animation masks. I generally don't use this part of the menu, but it's there, so you might find use for it. I haven't yet. Below, we have obviously a quick selection to go between different menus. So, for example, if I want to go just to the graph editor and make the whole panel that, it will do that. If I want to go back, change it back to perspective. Now, if I tap, we should get our two views. So if I was just say in this view, click down here and say now I want this one to be the graph. So you can see there, I can really customize what I'm doing really. Or we can make that the front view. Very useful. Okay, so let's go back into our main view here. And go back to a hotbox, and then to the right, it's just more of the same really. Disabling or enabling different parts of the elements. So here at the bottom we haven't got time slider, so we can bring the time slider back. And click over here, or we can hide the time slider. Time slider is obviously exactly what it says. It's a bit like if you've used After Effects, the time slider is the same idea. You drag it for different frames. We will get into that in a later lesson. So let's get back to our very, very exciting cylinder. Okay, so to create the cylinder, if I delete this by pressing delete on the keyboard, I hold down Shift and right click. This is the very basic polygonal creation menu. So from here I can create cylinders, cones, cubes, torus, sphere, plane, or a custom create polygon tool. So let's have a look at that. So this is, wherever I click, I'm going to drop as a vertex. So if I hold down X on the keyboard, which is going to make me snap to these grid points, I can draw a little Tetris object here, like this. Just clicking roughly where the points are. When I'm happy with my shape, I press Enter on the keyboard, and that completes the draw. Now, why is it black? Well, the reason it's black is because Maya has a way of displaying normals. So when it's black, this is the negative side of the normals, and this is the positive. So this would be the outer surface, and this would be the inside. It's useful when modeling because you want to know where these normals are going. We'll get into that later again. So if you wanted to make another object, so while an object is selected, in this case a polygon, and I hold down Shift and right click, the menu is changed. So if I click off, Shift right click, it's to create something. If I have a polygon selected, a Shift and right click, the menu changes and shows you something specific for polygon modeling. So this would be a very easy way to say axis and extrude. So we could do that. You see there? I'll do it again. Maya will, if you do the gesture correctly, and you will get this right over time. I'm just grabbing the arrow to move it up and down. This is what's known as a modified gimbal. And if I click on the circle, it changes to rotation. And if I want to scale it, I can scale it with this one that way. Oh, it's rotating. Sorry, undo that. The Z is undo, and Shift Z is redo. If I click on, should be able to just tap on one of these guys on the sec. Why does it not let me go back? There we go. So by clicking on one of these cubes, the center one appears. The center one is all three axes scaled universally. So if I click that, it does it there. If I click in the middle with the middle mouse button and empty void space, it does the same thing. So if I click this, then I can do the virtual slider again. Undo, undo. Okay, so when we're happy with that, we press Q on the keyboard, and that's taken us out of that tool. Okay, so that's how to create something. So let's cut this in. Let's do a little multi-cut. So while on the object is selected, it doesn't matter what level. At the moment, we're in component level. Okay, so let me bring the interface back to standard, classic. Okay, which is what you're used to. Can you see here? We're in component level. If we click here, we go to object level, and here will be group. Just to give you an illustration of what that is, if I duplicate that by doing Control D and then moving it off, if I shift to select both objects, so click on both objects holding Shift, you'll select both. Hit Control G, will make a group. Okay, so where's our outliner? There's our group. Okay, let's go back to perspective. Let's bring up the outliner. Oh, excuse me. Let's bring up the outliner, and let's turn off dag objects only. So there's our group we've made. Inside the group is the polygon surface 2 and polygon surface 1. Now, if I was to say use the grouping selection, and I selected them, you see there, it jumps to the root group of the object. If I go to the object level and click on an object, it selects that object. Now, obviously, I can't touch the vertexes at the moment because they're at component level. To go to component level, you can click component level by doing the button up here. Or what's much more intuitive is actually, again, using the contextual menus. So just using right click only brings up an object menu, which is very useful. So in here, you can select edges, vertexes, and faces, or even UVs as well. They kind of spider off. And below that, you have select hierarchy. You've got all these different options to be able to modify the object. So you can assign a new material, you can play around with color sets, you can select UVs, you can paint vertex colors, you can 3D paint, you can do outputs and select the outputs, select similar. I don't know what that, there you go. I'd never used that one before. There's a load in there, but the ones we're concerned with today are, say in this case, vertexes. You can see here, and then you can click on a vertex and then simply move it. So move it up and down, in and out. So while in the component level, shift right click, we will use the Multicut tool. We use Multicut tool quite often in our tutorial, so I'm just going to show you to do this with the Multicut. So Multicut will automatically select the relevant edge or vertex depending on where your proximity to your cursor is. So when the vertex turns red, it's telling the user that vertex is. If I was to click left, click that, it would say that's going to be my anchor point to draw the first line. I move over to here, and to see my other vertex where I want to draw the edge, click there, and it's drawn the vertex edge between the two. Now it hasn't actually completed the operation until I enter it. Now you can press enter on the keyboard, or what's actually much simpler is just right click on your mouse, and that'll drop that edge. Let's do it again. So we know we want to click there. So for example, I click here. See the percentage showing up? So that's quite useful. If I hold shift, it's now going to snap to a particular predefined value. Or if I don't want to shift and I just want to say, actually I wanted that point there, just drag it. It won't go past that vertex. See how far I'm over here? So that will restore it back to the snap on that point. And we can do the same here. So I click off and then drag and snap it that way. Another way of doing it. And when I'm happy with that, insert, right click. Okay. Okay. So I think that's going to get you started, and we'll roll on to the first lesson, which is modeling cylinders with intersections of other cylinders. So basically curve on curve modeling, which is a challenge because you generally get pinching. So I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how to avoid pinching and general workflows and approaches.